In Cambodia, a regime left behind monuments built from the skulls of 2 million of its own citizens. But a nation can also be broken one body at a time, with a single poisoned nut, or a forest of the impaled. From the palaces of Rome to the killing fields of Asia, the methods change, but the outcome does not. You are about to learn how a leader teaches a nation to devour itself. The scroll is unrolled with a faint, dry crackle of papyrus. The air in the atrium is still and cool, scented with olive oil from the lamps and the distant aroma of baking bread. Marcus Junius Silanus, a man whose family name is woven into the very fabric of the Republic, reads the words. There are not many. The ink is black and stark against the pale sheet. It is a command, not a request. An order from the emperor, his own son-in-law. The message is simple. By nightfall, he is to be dead. By his own hand. The ultimate degradation for a Roman of his standing. It is not an execution which implies a crime and a trial. It is a forced erasure. A quiet, domestic affair. He feels the weight of the scroll in his hand, heavier than any stone. His gaze drifts to the ceremonial dagger displayed on the wall, an heirloom of his ancestors. For generations, it has been a symbol of honor. Tonight, it will be an instrument of state-sponsored humiliation, wielded by a whim born in the fevered mind of a monster. The mind behind this command belongs to Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus. Rome knows him by a childhood nickname, one given to him by his father's legions, Caligula, Little Boot. In 37 AD, his ascension is met with a citywide exhalation of relief. Young, handsome, the son of the beloved general Germanicus, he is everything the reclusive and morose Tiberius was not. He promises reform, lavishes the people with games, and brings a fresh, vibrant energy to the Palatine Hill. For 7 months, Rome believes a new golden age has dawned. Then, in October, a severe illness grips him, the city prays. And when he recovers, the man who emerges is not the same. Something has been scoured from his soul, replaced by a chilling vacancy. The easy smile now looks like a predator's grimace. His eyes, once bright with promise, now hold a terrifying, restless energy. The historian Suetonius would later write of a fundamental shift, a descent into a madness that would turn the imperial court into a stage for his depravity. The Roman elite, masters of political survival, sense the change first. It's in the way he holds their gaze a second too long, in the jokes that are not jokes. The air grows thin. The promise of a new spring has turned overnight into the suffocating dread of a long, cruel winter. This new winter brings with it new rules, all of them unwritten, all of them subject to the emperor's volatile moods. The legal framework of the empire becomes a plaything. Justice is no longer a matter of law, but of performance. In the forum, a senator makes an offhand remark that displeases Caligula. Before the man can apologize, guards are on him. His arms are pinned. A knife flashes in the Roman sun, and the senator's tongue is sliced from his mouth. His screams are a wet, gurgling sound that is quickly silenced. Forced suicide becomes a common tool of statecraft, a way to eliminate rivals without the messiness of a public trial. The condemned receives the order and is expected to host a final, lavish dinner party, smiling and conversing with guests who know exactly why they are there. It is a ghastly parody of Roman Stoicism, a final public humiliation before the blade is drawn in private. Executions are no longer confined to the arena's sands. They become impromptu spectacles. A father is forced to dine with the emperor, to laugh at his jokes, just hours after being made to watch his own son's execution. Caligula watches the man's face, searching for any flicker of grief, any sign of defiance. He feeds on their terror, drawing strength from their silent, suffocating agony. For those closest to the throne, the danger is the most acute. And no one is closer than Marcus Junius Silanus. He is not just a respected consular, he is Caligula's father-in-law, a man who had guided and supported the young emperor's rise. But in the paranoid landscape of Caligula's mind, proximity is not a shield. It is a target. Following his illness, Caligula declares that Silanus had failed to offer adequate sacrifices to the gods for his recovery. The accusation is absurd, a transparent fiction. To Caligula, it is proof that Silanus secretly wished for his death, hoping to seize power for himself. The charge is treason, but there will be no trial. There is only the scroll, the command. In 38 AD, Silanus obeys. He cuts his own throat with a razor. When the news is brought to the palace, Caligula announces to the Senate that his noble father-in-law, consumed by guilt for his treachery, has administered his own much-deserved punishment. The senators, their faces pale masks of fear, rise to applaud the emperor's wisdom. They know this is a lie. They know a line has been crossed. This was not the elimination of a political enemy. This was the murder of family. The final guardrail of sanity and tradition has been shattered. From this point on, no one is safe. Silanus was not the last. The victims of the next 3 years are a litany of Rome's finest, their lives extinguished by a passing imperial whim. The end, when it comes, is often brutally swift. A man is dragged from his dinner table, the taste of wine still on his lips, and cut down in his own hallway. Another is invited to a private audience, only to be met by the emperor's German bodyguards, their faces impassive as they draw their swords. But it is the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own protectors, who live with the madness day in and day out. They are the instruments of his cruelty, the witnesses to his debauchery, and it is they who finally break. The conspiracy is led by their prefect, Cassius Chaerea, a man Caligula relentlessly mocks for his high-pitched voice. On January 24th, 41 AD, during a series of games, they make their move. They corner him in a secluded palace corridor, a crypto-porticus beneath the Palatine. Chaerea strikes the first blow, a glancing cut to the neck. Caligula screams. He tries to run, but the others close in. It is not a clean death. It is a frenzy of desperation and pent-up rage. The guards stab him again and again, 30 times, long after he has fallen. For a moment, there is only the sound of panting breath and the dripping of blood onto the mosaic floor. The emperor's body lies twisted and broken. The unblinking eyes of the painted figures on the walls bear silent witness to the silence that has, at last, fallen over the palace. The echoes of one mad emperor's laughter fade from the palace halls, but the imperial sickness has only deepened. Soon the cruelty will not be a private spectacle, but a public inferno, with the emperor himself providing the soundtrack for a city's ruin. The air over the Esquiline Hill grows thick, heavy with the ash of cedar beams and incinerated linen. For 6 days and 7 nights in July of 64 AD, the city of Rome consumes itself. The wooden tenements, the insulae, packed tight in the city's heart, act as kindling. Marble facades crack and fall like shattered bone. The roar is constant, a furnace breath that drowns out the screams of those trapped in the collapsing labyrinthine streets. When the inferno finally starves itself, 3 of Rome's 14 districts are gone, wiped from the earth. 7 more are smoking ruins. Rumor, carried on the hot wind, points to the Palatine Hill, to the emperor himself. But Nero needs a culprit. His gaze falls upon a small, insular sect, followers of a crucified Nazarene. They are called Christians. The accusation is not arson, but a more poetic charge, hatred of the human race. The punishment is a public spectacle. In the emperor's own gardens, stakes are driven into the earth. Men and women, smeared with pitch, are hoisted onto them. As dusk falls, they are set alight. Their bodies, wrapped in the tunica molesta, become human torches, casting a flickering, greasy light over the imperial festivities. Others are sewn into the skins of wild beasts and thrown to hunting dogs in the arena, the animals' teeth finding purchase in the rough hide before tearing into the soft flesh beneath. The cross, once a symbol for this nascent faith, is now the very instrument of its adherents' agonizingly slow death by asphyxiation. He was not born a monster. He was born Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus in 37 AD, the great-grandson of the divine Augustus. At 16, following the suspicious death of his stepfather, the Emperor Claudius, he is hailed as Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. His early reign is a period of promise, guided by the steady hands of the Stoic philosopher Seneca and the pragmatic Praetorian prefect, Burrus. For 5 years, the quinquennium Neronis, the empire experiences stability. But a darker influence coils at the heart of the court. His own mother, Agrippina the Younger, ambitious and ruthless, she sees her son not as emperor, but as an extension of her own will. She appears on coins alongside him, attempts to sit beside him during official functions, a constant, suffocating presence. The boy emperor begins to chafe. The whispers of his advisors, the allure of absolute authority, and the intoxicating poison of paranoia begin their work. He feels her shadow over every decision, her ambition a threat to his own. The bond between mother and son begins to fracture, the cracks filled with a lethal resentment. The student of Seneca, the patron of the arts, begins to recede, replaced by something else. A tyrant awakening to the terrifying truth that his every whim, no matter how depraved, can be made reality. The descent begins with the people closest to him. The murder of his mother is not a simple act of violence, but a perverse piece of theater. In 59 AD, he arranges for her to board a specially designed ship at Baiae, engineered to collapse and sink in the calm waters of the bay. He watches from the shore as the lead-weighted canopy crashes down. But Agrippina is a survivor. She slips free, swimming through the wreckage until she is rescued by a fishing boat. When the news of her survival reaches Nero, his composure shatters. Panic sets in. He sees her not as a wounded mother, but as an immortal enemy now bent on revenge. He abandons subtlety and sends assassins. They find her in her villa. According to the historian Cassius Dio, she faces her killers, bares her abdomen, and commands them, "Strike here, in the womb that bore such a monster." They obey. Next is his wife, Octavia, a woman beloved by the people but despised by him. He divorces her, accuses her of adultery, and exiles her to the island of Pandateria. Her death is methodical, clinical. Her veins are opened in the traditional Roman manner of suicide, but terror has slowed her heart, the blood refusing to flow. She is carried to a bath of steam, its suffocating heat finally stopping her breath. For his enemies, real or imagined, the cruelty is institutionalized. The Circus Maximus becomes a stage for his sadism, a place where the pretense of Roman justice is stripped away, revealing only the raw exercise of power. The Great Fire of 64 AD provides the ultimate canvas for his pathology. While the populace mourns in makeshift camps, their homes and livelihoods reduced to carbon, Nero plans his masterpiece. On the scorched earth of central Rome, he begins construction of a palace of unprecedented scale and luxury, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. A sprawling complex of villas, gardens, and an artificial lake, its centerpiece is a 100-foot-tall bronze statue of himself, the Colossus Neronis. The message is clear. Rome's ashes are the foundation for his personal glory. But the cost is immense, and the public mood turns venomous. The historian Tacitus reports the persistent rumor that during the fire, Nero appeared on his private stage and sang of the destruction of Troy, drawing a parallel between the ancient tragedy and the present ruin. To quell the rising anger, he requires a diversion, a collective enemy to absorb the city's rage. The Christians are politically invisible, their beliefs misunderstood and viewed with suspicion. They are the perfect scapegoat. The ensuing persecution is not a systematic empire-wide pogrom, but a localized, intensely sadistic campaign of terror within the city of Rome. It is a spectacle designed to entertain and distract, transforming the suffering of a despised minority into a grotesque public festival. The emperor himself is said to have mingled with the crowds, dressed as a charioteer, savoring the horror he has orchestrated. The cruelty cannot last. The Pisonian conspiracy of 65 AD, a plot by leading senators and equestrians, is discovered and brutally suppressed. Seneca, his former tutor, is forced to commit suicide. The purges escalate, but each execution only creates more enemies. By 68 AD, the empire is in open revolt. The governor Vindex raises a rebellion in Gaul, followed by Galba in Spain. The Senate, sensing the shift in power, finally acts. They declare Nero a hostis, a public enemy, to be executed by flogging. He flees the palace in disguise, a desperate, pathetic figure hiding in the suburban villa of a freedman. The sound of hoofbeats approaches, the soldiers sent to arrest him. His nerve fails him. He cannot bring himself to take his own life, weeping that the world is about to lose so great an artist. He paces, rehearsing tragic lines, his hands trembling. Finally, as the soldiers close in, he places a dagger to his throat and forces his loyal secretary, Epaphroditos, to drive it home. His final, gasping words, recorded by Suetonius, are not of remorse, but of a narcissism so profound it transcends death itself. Qualis artifex pereo. What an artist dies in me. The last of the Julio-Claudian emperors bleeds out on a dirty floor. His reign of terror ending not with a roar, but with a pathetic theatrical whimper. The flames of Rome eventually died out, but the seeds of tyranny find fertile ground in any age. Over 1,000 years later, in the shadow of the Carpathian Mountains, a new horror would take root. One planted not with seeds but with stakes, and watered with the blood of thousands. The summer of 1462 is thick with the scent of pine and decay. Sultan Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, rides at the head of an army that has shattered empires. His target is the modest Wallachian capital of Targoviste. But as his forces draw near, an unnatural silence falls. The expected resistance, the clash of steel, is absent. Instead, a valley opens before them, a clearing that stretches for 3 kilometers and is a kilometer wide. It is a forest, but not of wood. The air, heavy and buzzing with flies, carries a smell so foul it makes the war-hardened janissaries gag. Before them stand thousands upon thousands of tall, sharpened stakes, and on each stake, a human body. Over 20,000 of them, men, women, and even children, hoisted into the air in a grotesque parody of a woodland. Their bodies are in all stages of decomposition, some still writhing in the final silent throes of agony. This is not a battlefield. It is a statement, a meticulously crafted monument to terror, designed by one man to unnerve a sultan who believed he had already seen the worst of humanity. The architect of this horror is the Prince of Wallachia, Vlad III. History will know him as Vlad the Impaler. He is the son of the dragon, Vlad Dracul, a name that carries the weight of a sacred order and the whisper of the demonic. His is a life forged in the crucible of betrayal and survival. As a boy, he was a political hostage in the Ottoman court, a gilded cage where he learned the brutal calculus of power from the very men he would one day fight. He watched, he learned, and he nurtured a cold, methodical hatred. When he finally claims the Wallachian throne, he inherits a kingdom fractured by scheming nobles, the boyars, and bled dry by the constant threat of Ottoman dominion. His response is not to build alliances, but to build fear. He seeks to impose an order so absolute, so terrifying, that dissent becomes unthinkable. For Vlad, cruelty is not a passion. It is a political instrument, honed to surgical precision. And his chosen instrument, the one that will become his terrible signature upon the pages of history, is the stake. Impalement is an art of slow, excruciating death. The process begins with a thick wooden pole, 10 to 12 feet long, its point sharpened but not too sharp. A blunter tip is preferred. It pushes organs aside rather than piercing them, a distinction crucial for prolonging the suffering. The pole is often greased with fat. The victim, stripped naked, is forced onto the point, which is inserted through the rectum, or for women, the vagina. A team of executioners then slowly, carefully raises the stake upright, planting it in the ground. The victim's own body weight becomes the engine of their demise. Gravity pulls them downward, inch by agonizing inch. The stake travels upward through the body cavity, rupturing the intestines, the stomach, the diaphragm. If the executioner is skilled, it will miss the heart and major arteries, emerging from the victim's shoulder, neck, or even mouth. There they are left, suspended between earth and sky, fully conscious. The pain is a white, blinding fire. Every breath is a struggle, every heartbeat a fresh wave of torment. In the face of Mehmed's overwhelming invasion in 1462, Vlad unleashes this torment on an industrial scale. He cannot defeat the Ottoman army in open battle, so he wages a war on their minds. His campaign is a symphony of terror. Scorched earth tactics leave the invaders with no food. Poisoned wells turn their water to bile, and night raids on their camps spread chaos and paranoia. But his magnum opus awaits them outside Targoviste. As his forces retreat toward the capital, he rounds up every Turkish prisoner, every captured soldier, and any local Wallachian suspected of disloyalty. He marches them to that waiting valley. The work takes days. The air fills with the sounds of mallets striking wood and the screams that follow. A hierarchy is observed in the horror. The highest stakes, positioned in the center, are reserved for the highest-ranking Turkish captives, a final mocking gesture of protocol. It is a calculated spectacle of rot and ruin, a warning written in human flesh. For those left on the stakes, the end comes with agonizing slowness. The sun beats down, blistering their skin. Dehydration cracks their lips and swells their tongues. Birds of prey circle overhead, patient. Shock sets in. The body's systems begin to fail. Sepsis from perforated bowels poisons the blood. Death might come in hours, or it might take days, a drawn-out descent into delirium and oblivion, as the stake continues its unyielding journey through the body. When Mehmed the Conqueror finally beholds the forest of the impaled, even he, a man who waded through the blood of Constantinople, is shaken. He reportedly turns to his men and says, "How can we despoil the lands of a man who does such things?" He turns his army around. The psychological weapon has hit its mark. The name Dracula, once a title of honor, becomes a whisper of pure dread, passed down through German pamphlets and Romanian folklore. It is a name that will eventually be borrowed for a creature of the night, a fictional monster whose evil pales in comparison to the cold, calculating cruelty of the man who inspired him, leaving his legacy not in stone, but in the memory of a forest where men, not trees, once reached for the sky. A forest of the dead is a clear warning to a prince's enemies. A century later, far to the north, the terror turns inward. A czar's paranoia has been unleashed, sending black-clad phantoms to bleed his own kingdom and hunt for traitors in every shadow. The ice on the Volkhov River groans under the weight of a Russian winter. It is January 1570, and the air is so cold it feels like a physical blow to the lungs. On the great bridge connecting the two sides of Novgorod, figures in black robes move with chilling purpose. These are the Tsar's men. They drag families from the assembled shivering crowds, merchants, priests, artisans, their wives, their children. The screams are thin, swallowed by the vast frozen landscape. There are no trials here. Only accusations delivered by the swing of an axe or the point of a spear. Victims are bound, hands and feet tied tight, then heaved over the parapet. For a few seconds there is only the sound of rushing air, then a sickening crack as a body hits the ice, or a heavy splash as it punches through into the black suffocating water below. The current is swift, pulling them under. Those who manage to fight their way back to the surface are met by men in boats. who use long pikes and boat hooks to push their heads back down into the freezing depths until the struggling stops. For 5 weeks, this becomes the city's rhythm. The river, choked with the dead, runs red beneath the ice. This methodical terror is the work of a single monumental will. It belongs to Ivan IV Vasilievich, first Tsar of all Russia. Crowned at 16, Ivan's early reign was one of reform and expansion. But the death of his beloved wife, Anastasia Romanovna, in 1560, shattered his world. He saw assassins in every shadow, convinced the boyars, the ancient noble clans like the Schwieskis and the Belskis who had tormented him in his youth, had poisoned her. His grief curdled into a bottomless paranoia. In December 1564, he staged a masterful piece of political theater, abandoning Moscow for the fortified settlement of Alexandrov-Sloboda. He abdicated, leaving the state rudderless, and waited. As chaos mounted, a panicked delegation of clergy and boyars journeyed through the snow to beg him to return. He agreed, but on one non-negotiable condition: that he be granted absolute authority to create a personal domain within Russia, a state within the state. He called it the Oprichnina, the land set apart. It would answer to him alone, and it would become the instrument of his wrath. From that moment in 1565, Russia was divided into 2 worlds, the land of the state and the land of the Tsar's vengeance. The agents of that vengeance were the Oprichniki, a brotherhood of terror numbering in the thousands. They dressed as monks, in coarse black robes, but rode as a dark cavalry. From the saddles of their black horses hung their grotesque insignia, a severed dog's head, to sniff out treason, and a broom, to sweep it from the land of Russia. The stench of decay followed them. Their leader and Ivan's most trusted butcher was Malyuta Skuratov, a man whose name became a synonym for cruelty. The Oprichnina's mandate was simple: eliminate the Tsar's enemies, real or imagined. Their methods were a study in systematic horror. They descended upon a boyar's estate, confiscating the land for the Tsar and casting the family out into the wilderness to starve. In the dungeons of the Alexandrov-Sloboda, they perfected tortures of unspeakable ingenuity. Suspects were slowly roasted over low fires, impaled on sharpened stakes, or flayed alive. In Moscow's public squares, they staged mass executions that served as a brutal lesson in obedience. They were above all law, a force of pure political gravity, and their presence silenced all dissent. The sight of a black-clad rider on the horizon was enough to make a village fall silent, the people bolting their doors, praying the nightmare would pass them by. By late 1569, Ivan's paranoid gaze fell upon the ancient and wealthy city of Novgorod. A bastion of republican tradition and a commercial rival to Moscow, it had long been a thorn in the side of autocracy. The pretext for its destruction was a letter, likely forged by his own circle, implicating the city's Archbishop Pimen and its leading citizens in a plot to defect to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. For Ivan, this was more than enough. He gathered his Oprichniki, and in December they began their march. It was not a march of conquest, but of extermination. They scoured the towns on the road to Novgorod, leaving a trail of devastation through Klin, Tver, and Torzhok. When they finally reached the city's walls on January 2nd, they surrounded it completely, building a tight cordon. Nothing and no one would escape. Ivan established a tribunal, a mockery of justice where accusations were followed immediately by condemnation. Over the next several weeks, the Oprichnina disassembled the city piece by bloody piece. Monasteries were ransacked, their holy icons used for target practice. Churches were stripped of centuries of wealth. Thousands of citizens were rounded up each day and subjected to the pravej, a public flogging to extract confessions and the locations of hidden fortunes, before being taken for their final walk to the Volkhov River. The end for the victims was a catalogue of agonies. Some were tied to sleighs and dragged through the frozen streets until their skin was shredded away, then cast into the river. Others were subjected to a torture involving fire and water. They were seared with torches and then thrown, still steaming, into the icy currents, the thermal shock stopping their hearts instantly. The chroniclers of Pskov wrote that the Volkhov was so dammed with corpses that it overflowed its banks. The terror did not end with Ivan. The Oprichnina, his personal weapon, proved useless against the Crimean Tatars who sacked Moscow in 1571. A disgraced Ivan disbanded his creation the following year, even forbidding its name to be spoken. His paranoia, however, only festered. In 1581, in a fit of rage, he struck his own son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich, with a pointed staff, inflicting a fatal wound. With that single blow, he shattered his own dynasty. His reign of terror had broken the power of the old nobility. But it left behind a state built on fear, a depopulated and ruined countryside, and a crisis of succession that would plunge Russia into the devastating chaos known as the Time of Troubles. The true legacy of the Oprichnina was the silence of the graveyards and the deep, permanent scar it left on the soul of the nation. The fear of poison haunted the Russian court, a specter in every cup. Centuries later and an ocean away, a queen would weaponize that same fear. On her island, innocence itself is put on trial, proven not by words but by surviving the judgment of a toxic seed. The accused stands in the oppressive heat before the silent crowd. In their hand is a small pale kernel scraped clean from the pit of the Tangena fruit. It looks harmless, almost like an almond. But everyone present, from the royal judge to the smallest child, knows it is a seed of judgment, harvested from the Cerbera odolam, the suicide tree. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and fear. The accused is ordered to swallow. The kernel is dry, chalky, and its bitterness coats the tongue instantly, a vile promise of what is to come. Then comes the chaser, 3 small, slick pieces of chicken skin, followed by cup after cup of thin rice water, forced down the throat to churn the stomach. Now there is only waiting. All eyes are on the accused, not for a confession, but for a convulsion. The body is now the sole witness, the stomach the sole arbiter of truth. In this courtroom of flesh and bone, salvation is not found in a plea but in a purge. A violent, full-throated vomit that expels the poison and all 3 pieces of skin is innocence. Anything less, a slow poisoning, a partial regurgitation, or worst of all, a silent, traitorous gut, is a confession of guilt, signed and sealed by death. This ritual of terror was the central pillar of justice under Ranavalona I, Queen of the Marina Kingdom of Madagascar. Ascending to the throne in 1828, after the convenient death of her progressive husband, King Radama I, she immediately began to dismantle his legacy. Where Radama had courted European powers, inviting London Missionary Society members to establish schools and churches, Ranavalona saw only a threat. She was a fierce traditionalist, a believer in the sanctity of the ancestors and the old ways. In her eyes, the Christian God was a foreign poison, and its followers were agents of a cultural and spiritual invasion. She severed diplomatic ties with Britain and France, expelled foreign nationals, and initiated a brutal 33-year reign of isolationist policy. Her power was absolute, consolidated through a series of purges against any who might challenge her claim to the throne. To enforce her will and purify her kingdom, she did not invent a new cruelty, but resurrected an old one. The Tangena Ordeal, a traditional trial by poison, was transformed from a sporadic ritual into an instrument of state policy, a systematic tool for identifying and eliminating any and all dissent. The mechanics of the ordeal were a masterpiece of psychological terror cloaked in the solemnity of divine will. The process is precise, unyielding. Once an accusation of witchcraft, theft, or Christianity is made, the accused is brought to a designated place. The Mpitantana, or ordeal administrator, prepares the dose. The kernel of the Tangena is ground to a paste. This is mixed with juice from the banana plant, and then, crucially, the 3 pieces of chicken skin, each a marker of fate. After the accused swallows the concoction and the requisite rice water, the waiting begins. The poison contains cerberin, a potent cardiac glycoside. Within minutes, the first symptoms appear: a burning in the stomach, a tightening in the chest. The heart begins to flutter, an erratic drumbeat of terror. The body's every instinct is to reject the toxin. For the innocent, the ancestors will supposedly intervene, causing a swift and total emesis. The crowd watches, listening for the telltale heave. If the accused vomits, the ejected material is painstakingly examined. All 3 pieces of chicken skin must be present. 2 is not enough. 1 is a death sentence. If nothing comes up, or if the victim simply collapses and dies, their guilt is considered self-evident. There is no appeal. Under Ranavalona, this trial became a terrifying purge, unleashed most ferociously against the island's growing Christian population. The climax of this persecution began on March 26, 1849, a day the Malagasy Christians would come to call Fatidra, the day of the breaking of the blood oath. Thousands of accused are rounded up and marched to Anilakali, in the heart of the capital city, Antananarivo. There, before the assembled masses, the Queen's justice is dispensed on an industrial scale. Some are sentenced immediately to other fates. 18 are thrown from the cliffs at Ampamarinana, their bodies shattering on the rocks below as a warning. But for hundreds, perhaps thousands more, the Tangena is prepared. The ordeal is administered not one by one, but in waves. The scale is staggering. The missionary William Ellis, who documented the rain from afar, estimated that in some years, as many as 1 in every 5 people in the central province of Imerina were forced to undergo the trial. Over the course of her reign, conservative estimates suggest 20 to 30% of the entire population of Imerina perished from the ordeal or the subsequent executions. It was a demographic catastrophe born from a queen's paranoia, a constant rolling wave of death that washed over her kingdom for 3 decades. For those whose bodies betrayed them, the end was rarely swift. If the poison itself did not kill, it inflicted an agonizing physiological breakdown. The cerberin attacks the central nervous system. As the heart rate plummets and breathing becomes ragged, the victim experiences violent convulsions, blurred vision, and an unbearable burning sensation that spreads from the gut through every limb. They are lucid, aware, as their own body suffocates them from the inside. It is a death that can take hours. But for the guilty who survived this torment, only to fail the test of the chicken skins, another fate awaited. They were led away, weakened and poisoned, to face the executioner. Some were bound and placed in pits where boiling water was poured over them until they were dead. Others were tied to stakes and pierced with spears, their families forced to watch. Ranavalona's reign of terror ended only with her natural death in 1861. She left behind a kingdom decimated, its population reduced by as much as half in some regions. The fields were fallow, the villages hollowed out, an entire generation lost to the judgment of a poisonous nut. The poison of one monarch's paranoia fades from the island. But on the mainland, a new industrial-scale cruelty is dawning. It has been charted in a distant European capital, a brutal ledger of profit to be enforced upon the people of the Great River. The air in the village of Baringa is thick, heavy with the scent of rain and fear. A man named Nsala stands before a Belgian agent of the Anglo-Belgian India Rubber Company. His rubber basket is light. The quota, an impossible demand, has not been met. There is no negotiation. There is only the quiet, methodical uncoiling of rope. His wife and child are bound. The soldiers of the Force Publique are impassive, their rifles held loose. Nsala is given a choice. Face the chikot, a whip of hippopotamus hide that tears flesh from bone, or go back into the forest, deeper this time, and do not return until the basket is full. He chooses the forest. When he returns weeks later, exhausted and famished, his village is silent. He finds what is left of his 5-year-old daughter, Boali, a severed hand and a foot. The sentries at the rubber post had grown tired of her crying. They killed her and his wife, then butchered the bodies to be eaten. The hand is proof that a bullet was not wasted. It is a receipt for a debt of rubber, paid in blood. This ledger of human suffering was balanced in the gilded halls of Brussels by a king celebrated for his philanthropy. In 1885, at the Berlin Conference, King Leopold II of Belgium persuaded the great powers of Europe and the United States to grant him personal sovereignty over a vast swath of Central Africa. It was not a Belgian colony. It was his private property, an estate 76 times the size of his own country, which he named the Congo Free State. He promised to bring civilization, to suppress the slave trade, and to open the continent to free commerce. He created the International African Association as a humanitarian front, a noble veneer for a purely extractive enterprise. At first, the prize was ivory, but in 1888, a Scottish veterinarian named John Boyd Dunlop patented the pneumatic tire. Suddenly, the world had an insatiable hunger for rubber, and Leopold's personal kingdom was choked with wild rubber vines, a green treasure waiting to be tapped. The king's civilizing mission was about to reveal its true nature. To harvest this red gold, Leopold created a private army, the Force Publique. Its officers were white Europeans, its soldiers conscripted Africans, often taken from conquered peoples and forced to subjugate their neighbors. They were instruments of a simple, brutal system. Each village was given a rubber quota. To ensure compliance, the soldiers would storm a village at dawn, seizing the women and children. They were herded into stockades, hostages to be held until the men returned from the rainforest with the required weight of rubber. Failure meant starvation for the hostages, or death. For the men, failure meant the chikot. 100 lashes was often a death sentence. To account for their ammunition, soldiers were ordered to present the severed right hand of a rebel for every cartridge spent. This grisly accounting created a horrific economy of its own. When soldiers used cartridges to hunt, or when they chose to terrorize a village into submission without a fight, they simply took the hands from the living. Baskets of smoked human hands became a form of currency, proof of terror delivered. The system was so devastatingly effective it created a new term, red rubber. The demand was relentless. Men were driven into the jungle for weeks, sometimes months at a time, to find and tap the dwindling vines. They climbed trees, often falling to their deaths. They worked until they collapsed from exhaustion. While they were gone, no one was left to clear the fields, to plant the cassava, to hunt or fish. Famine became a constant companion. Society itself began to disintegrate under the strain. Disease, carried by the colonizers and thriving in the weakened, displaced populations, swept through the land. Smallpox and sleeping sickness killed by the thousands. Punitive expeditions by the Force Publique became state-sanctioned massacres, entire villages wiped from existence for resisting the quotas. From 1885 to 1908, the population of the Congo Free State plummeted. The historian John Vansina, after a meticulous demographic study, concluded that the population was cut in half. The total loss of life from murder, starvation, and disease is estimated to be between 10 and 15 million people. It was a demographic collapse on a scale rarely seen in human history. The truth began to leak out, carried by whispers and smuggled letters. In 1890, the African-American journalist George Washington Williams wrote a blistering open letter to Leopold detailing the crimes he had witnessed. A shipping clerk in Antwerp named Edmund Dean Morel noticed that the ships arriving from the Congo were filled with rubber and ivory worth millions. But the ships returning carried only soldiers, officers, and firearms. This was not trade. It was slavery. He, along with the British diplomat Roger Casement, whose 1904 report officially documented the atrocities, formed the Congo Reform Association, one of the first great human rights campaigns of the 20th century. Missionaries like Alice Seeley Harris used a new technology, the camera, to capture images of mutilated children and grieving fathers, photographs that shocked the world. Under immense international pressure in November 1908, Leopold II was forced to sell his personal fiefdom to the Belgian government. He died a year later, one of the wealthiest men in Europe, having never once set foot in the land he had so utterly broken. The grand arches and museums he built in Brussels stand today, monuments financed by an unimaginable toll of severed hands and extinguished lives. The greed of one king had bled a continent dry. But the 20th century would perfect a more intimate form of tyranny. Across the vast expanse of a new red empire, the state itself becomes the predator, and its own people are the prey. The sound begins as a low rumble, the vibration felt through the floorboards before the ear can place it. Then the heavy knock. It is always late, after midnight, when the city is a frozen tableau of silence and shadow. In apartments across Moscow, Leningrad, and Kiev, families freeze. The knock is not a question, it is a summons. The men from the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, the NKVD, do not need to force the door. It is always opened. They stand on the threshold, their long leather coats smelling of the cold night and cheap tobacco. There is no struggle. There is only the quiet rustle of clothes, a last look at a sleeping child, and the metallic click of the apartment door closing for the final time. Neighbors hear the heavy tread on the stairs, the cough of an engine turning over. They see the dark shape of the Gaz M1, the Black Raven, as it pulls away from the curb. They see nothing. They heard nothing. Another citizen, a factory manager, a decorated officer, a poet, a loyal party member, has just been erased, branded an enemy of the people, and swallowed by the night. This methodical terror emanates from a single guarded office in the heart of the Kremlin. There, Joseph Stalin, the man of steel, pores over lists of names. Following the assassination of his potential rival Sergei Kirov on December 1st, 1934, Stalin finds the perfect pretext to unleash a long-simmering paranoia. He sees conspiracy in every corner, a threat in every whispered conversation. The old Bolsheviks, men like Lev Kamenev and Grigory Zinoviev, who had stood with Lenin, are now seen as vipers in the party's nest. The decorated heroes of the Red Army, men who forged the Soviet military, are suspected of treason. Intellectuals, engineers, artists, anyone with independent thought is a potential saboteur. Stalin's goal is not merely punishment. It is the complete atomization of society. He will burn away every loyalty, to family, to friends, to comrades, until only one remains. Absolute terrified loyalty to the state, and to him. The Great Purge is not an act of chaos. It is the deliberate, calculated construction of a new reality, built upon a foundation of fear and absolute power. The machinery of this new reality is brutally efficient. Once inside the NKVD's black car, the accused enters a world without law or time. In the basement interrogation rooms of Moscow's Lubyanka prison, the process begins. The air is thick with sweat and despair. Sleep is denied for days on end through a technique called the conveyor, where interrogators work in shifts, relentlessly questioning the exhausted prisoner until their mind begins to fracture. Beatings are routine, the pain a dull, constant rhythm against which false narratives are built. Under the direction of Nikolai Yezhov, the diminutive and ruthless head of the NKVD, interrogators use Article 58 of the Soviet Criminal Code, a vaguely worded statute that can define any action or inaction as counter-revolutionary activity. The objective is a signed confession. It does not need to be true. It only needs to exist. For high-profile victims, this confession becomes the script for a meticulously staged show trial. For hundreds of thousands of others, their fate is decided in minutes by an NKVD troika, a three-person committee that reviews a file and passes a sentence, often death, without ever seeing the accused. The state has become prosecutor, judge, and, all too often, executioner. Between the summer of 1937 and the autumn of 1938, the machine accelerates into a frenzy of bloodletting known as the Yezhovshchina. On July 30th, 1937, Yezhov signs NKVD Order number 0447. It is a death warrant for the entire nation. The order establishes quotas by region for the number of citizens to be arrested and the number to be executed. It is industrialized murder managed with the cold logic of a 5-year plan. Local NKVD chiefs, eager to demonstrate their loyalty, wire Moscow requesting to exceed their quotas. The terror consumes everyone. Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky, a brilliant military strategist, is executed along with 7 other top Red Army commanders, decapitating the Soviet officer corps just years before the Nazi invasion. Entire ethnic populations, Poles, Germans, Latvians, are systematically targeted and shot. The paranoia feeds itself, an accusation is a death sentence, and the only way to save oneself is to accuse others. In this 18-month period, over 1.5 million people are arrested. At least 700,000 of them are shot. The nation is not being purged of its enemies. It is being bled of its own people. For the condemned, the end comes in one of 2 ways. The first is a bullet. In the basements of prisons or at killing fields like the Butovo firing range outside Moscow, prisoners are led out in small groups. They are told to undress in the biting cold. A sharp command, a shot to the back of the skull from a Nagin M1895 revolver, and it is over. Their bodies are thrown into pre-dug trenches, covered with a thin layer of earth. The second death is slower, a protracted agony in the frozen expanse of the Gulag. In the labor camps of Kolyma, where winter temperatures drop to 60 below zero, the human body is simply another resource to be consumed. Prisoners work 12-hour shifts, mining gold or felling timber on starvation rations of thin soup and stale bread. Scurvy blackens their gums. Frostbite devours their fingers and toes. Exhaustion hollows them out until they are walking skeletons, their minds erased by cold and hunger. They collapse in the snow and are left where they fall. The legacy is a silence that blankets the nation for decades, a deep internal wound of distrust. Children learn not to ask what happened to their fathers. Wives learn to say their husbands died of a heart attack. A generation is taught that a careless word can make you disappear, leaving behind only a faint tremor of fear in the hearts of those who knew you. The machinery of the state has ground millions to dust, all to purify an idea. As that shadow falls, the gears of ideology turn eastward. There, a new furnace is being forged, one that will demand a sacrifice not of political loyalty, but of the harvest, the land, and the future itself. In the quiet cold of a Henan winter, the silence is the first sign. It is a profound quiet, deeper than snow. It is the absence of a dog's bark, a child's laugh, the rhythmic chop of a farmer's hoe. Inside a mud-brick home, a family lies still on their shared kang, a sleeping platform of cold earth. Their eyes are open, fixed on the smoke-stained ceiling, but they see nothing. The body, in its final desperate act of self-preservation, has already consumed its own muscle. The stomach, long empty, has ceased its gnawing ache. Now, there is only a strange, floating calm. Outside, the fields are a graveyard of withered stalks. Just kilometers away, state granaries are filled with grain, some of it already beginning to rot. Heavily armed guards patrol the perimeter. From a loudspeaker mounted on a pole in the village square, a tinny voice, full of revolutionary fervor, proclaims another record-breaking harvest, another triumph for the people. The proclamation echoes across the empty fields, over the silent houses, a ghost of a promise made to the already dead. This nationwide funeral dirge began as a symphony of hope. In 1958, Mao Zedong, chairman of the Communist Party of China, stood before his nation and promised a shortcut to paradise. China, he declared, would not walk the slow, arduous path to industrialization. It would leap. In a single convulsive bound of revolutionary will, it would transform from a vast agrarian society into a modern communist utopia, overtaking Great Britain in steel production within 15 years. The campaign was given a name full of kinetic, unstoppable force, the Great Leap Forward. It was an idea born of ideology so pure it was completely detached from the soil, from the seasons, from the physical limits of a human body. It was a belief that manpower and political zeal could bend the laws of physics and biology. The collective will of 600 million people, Mao wagered, was a force more powerful than nature itself. The party's propaganda machine roared to life, painting a future of endless abundance, of communal feasts and gleaming steel mills rising from the rice paddies. A future that demanded the complete surrender of the self. The surrender was absolute. Across the countryside, centuries of tradition were dismantled in a matter of months. Private plots of land, the source of a family's sustenance for generations, were outlawed. Tools, livestock, even the iron wok from the family stove, were confiscated and melted down for the collective. Farmers were herded into massive people's communes, some with populations of over 100,000. Life was militarized. Workers marched to the fields at dawn to the sound of a bugle, ate their meager rations in vast, chaotic communal canteens, and worked until they collapsed. Local party officials, desperate to please Beijing, reported fantastical crop yields from experimental fields called Sputniks. They faked photographs, piling the harvest from many fields onto one small plot to create an image of impossible density. The central government then collected its share based on these fabricated numbers, seizing nearly all the real grain and leaving the producers to starve. Simultaneously, the entire country was consumed by a hysterical obsession with steel. Over 90 million people were pulled from the fields to tend to small backyard furnaces, melting scrap metal in a futile attempt to meet Mao's impossible quotas. The air filled with acrid smoke as forests were clear-cut for fuel. The metal they produced was useless pig iron, but the cost was real. The harvest, untended, rotted in the fields. The result was not a leap, but a fall into the single greatest famine in human history. Between 1959 and 1961, the state-engineered catastrophe reached its apex. In the annals of official party documents, it is called the 3 years of natural disasters. But the weather was not the primary killer. The killer was the policy. The killer was the lie. In provinces like Anhui, Sichuan, and Henan, the death toll was apocalyptic. The official estimate, released decades later, admits to 15 million deaths. Western scholars, piecing together demographic data, place the number somewhere between 40 and 80 million. It is a scale of death that defies comprehension. The population of California twice over, wiped from the earth. As food disappeared, society dissolved. People ate leaves, sawdust, and a type of soft clay called guanyin soil that filled the stomach but blocked the intestines, causing a slow and agonizing death. Party reports, long suppressed, detail a descent into hell. Markets where human flesh was sold, neighbors hunting neighbors, parents consuming their own children to survive. This was not a secret. The state knew. It chose instead to intensify the repression, executing those who dared to steal food and denying the famine's existence to the outside world. The end comes slowly. First, the body swells with edema, the skin stretched and shiny. Then comes the wasting. The immune system fails. A simple cold becomes a death sentence. In villages across the vastness of China, whole families simply lay down and expired in unison. The living lacked the strength to bury the dead, and bodies were left in their homes or piled into mass graves. A demographic chasm was carved into the nation, a silent generation that was never born. For decades, the Great Leap Forward was a forbidden topic, a ghost in the national memory. The party's official narrative blamed bad weather and concealed the true scale of the horror from its own people. Peng Dehuai, the defense minister who dared to write a private letter to Mao in 1959 outlining the unfolding disaster, was purged, tortured, and publicly humiliated. His fate served as a chilling warning to any who would speak the truth. The trauma of those years became a deep, unhealed wound, a foundational terror of chaos and starvation that lingers in the political consciousness, a silent justification for control at any cost. The catastrophic dream of a perfect agrarian state did not die with the famine. The ideology only festered, spreading southward to a smaller kingdom. There, the fields would soon be cleared not for planting rice, but for burying nearly everyone who knew how to read a book. The heat of April 17, 1975, presses down on Phnom Penh, thick and suffocating. For 5 years, the city has been a refuge from the civil war raging in the countryside. Now the war is over. Black-clad Khmer Rouge soldiers, many of them teenagers with impassive faces, patrol the streets. Loudspeakers crackle to life, the message simple, direct. The Americans are coming to bomb the city. Everyone must evacuate. For 3 days only. Leave your homes unlocked. Angkar, the organization, will protect your property. The relief of peace curdles into confusion, then a quiet, gnawing fear. The exodus begins. 2 million people pour out of the city, a river of humanity flowing into the unknown. They carry what they can. The sick are pushed in their hospital beds, IV drips swinging. The sun beats down. There is no water, no food provided. The 3-day walk stretches into a week, then forever. This is not a temporary evacuation. This is the emptying of a nation's heart. The old and the weak are the first to fall, their bodies left on the roadside. A Khmer Rouge cadre's boot is the only eulogy. The destination is a re-education, a purification in the vast, unforgiving rice paddies. A new society born from mud and sweat. For those who resist, or simply falter, the sentence is already passed. It will be carried out not with a bullet, but with the blunt edge of a hoe, the splintered handle of an axe. This new reality is the vision of one man, Saloth Sar, a former teacher educated in Paris who now calls himself Pol Pot. In the student cafes of the Latin Quarter, he had consumed the radical philosophies of Stalin and Mao, but his own ideology would be something far more absolute. He dreams of Year Zero, not a reformation of Cambodia, but its complete annihilation and rebirth. He envisions a perfect agrarian society, a collective of peasants working in absolute equality, uncorrupted by foreign ideas, by technology, by thought itself. The enemy is intangible. It is history. It is memory. Angkar, the faceless entity he commands, declares war on the city, the locus of all corruption. Its inhabitants are new people, tainted by education, by commerce, by contact with the outside world. They must be broken, remade, or discarded. The old people, the rural peasantry, are the true revolutionaries. The new Cambodia, renamed Democratic Kampuchea, will be a nation sealed from the world, a vast labor camp dedicated to a single monstrous idea: to erase every trace of what came before, and to build a utopia on a foundation of bones. The individual must cease to exist. There is only the collective, only Angkar. The machinery of Year Zero grinds into motion with terrifying speed. The National Bank of Cambodia is dynamited, its currency fluttering into the streets like confetti, now worthless. Markets are abolished. Schools, hospitals, and monasteries are shuttered, their buildings repurposed as prisons, barracks, or granaries. The family unit, a bastion of old loyalties, is systematically dismantled. Children are taken from their parents, indoctrinated, and taught to spy. Angkar is my mother and father, they are forced to chant. The slightest infraction, the smallest complaint, is a betrayal of the revolution. The population is sorted. To have been a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, an artist, this is a death sentence. To speak a foreign language, to wear glasses, to have hands uncalloused by manual labor, these are the signs of a class enemy, a parasite on the peasant state. Accusation is enough. There are no trials. A person is simply taken for re-education. They are led to a place like Tuol Sleng, a former high school in Phnom Penh, now designated Security Prison 21. Here, under the command of the meticulous torturer Comrade Dutch, prisoners are photographed, catalogued, and brutalized until they confess to imagined crimes, being agents for the CIA, the KGB, for anyone. The confession, once signed, is the final piece of paperwork. The prisoner's journey is not yet over. In just 44 months, between 1975 and 1979, this apparatus of purification will murder a nation. The final death toll is unknowable, but estimates place it between 1.5 and 3 million people, a quarter of Cambodia's population, erased from the earth. The causes of death are a grim trinity: execution, starvation, and disease born of overwork. In the fields, the rice quotas are impossible, the rations a thin gruel that cannot sustain life. In the prisons, the logic is even colder. At S21, once a prisoner has confessed, they are loaded onto trucks, blindfolded, and driven 9 miles southwest of the city. They arrive at an old long-gone orchard called Choung Ek. To conserve ammunition, bullets are reserved for the Khmer Rouge themselves. The prisoners are forced to kneel at the edge of freshly dug pits. A diesel generator roars to life, its noise meant to drown out the sounds to come, the anthems of the new state and the screams of the dying. The executioners use whatever is at hand: iron bars, sharpened bamboo sticks, the back of an axe. The pits fill quickly. After the executions, chemical agents like DDT are shoveled over the bodies, both to mask the smell of decomposition and to kill any who might have survived the bludgeoning. This is one of over 300 such killing fields scattered across the country. The silence that follows is profound. At Choung Ek, there is a large chankiri tree. Its bark is still stained with the blood and brain matter of the infants and young children who were held by their legs and swung against its trunk, their bodies then tossed into the open pits beside their mothers. This was done to stop them from growing up to avenge their parents. In the labor camps, death is a slower, more intimate horror. It is the bloat of kwashiorkor from protein deficiency, the delirium of malaria, the uncontrollable wasting of dysentery. It is the simple, quiet act of lying down in the fields from absolute exhaustion and never getting up again. When the Vietnamese army finally invades in January 1979, they find a country shattered beyond recognition. A generation of its brightest minds is gone. The social fabric is shredded. Today, at the memorial stupa at Choung Ek, more than 8,000 skulls are arranged by age and sex, staring out from behind glass panels. But the true memorial is the land itself. After a heavy rain, even now the soil gives up its ghosts. A shard of bone, a scrap of cloth, a human tooth washed clean by the monsoon. As one utopian dream curdles into a nightmare of skulls, another continent awakens to a different poison. In the newly independent heart of Africa, the revolution is not ideological. It is the singular, paranoid vision of one man, a butcher who sees enemies in every shadow. In Kampala, the nights are thick with a humidity that carries sound, the distant bark of a dog, the rumble of a lone vehicle on a potholed road, and then the squeal of tires. A door slams, a single muffled cry swallowed by the darkness. By morning, another family has an empty chair at the table. Another workspace is vacant. No one asks where they have gone. To ask is to be noticed. The denunciations come without warning, broadcast over the state radio. A name, an accusation of being a foreign agent, a saboteur, an intellectual. It is a death sentence delivered by airwave. The bodies surface days or weeks later. They clog the intake grates of the Owen Falls Dam, pale and swollen. They are found tangled in the papyrus reeds of Lake Victoria, where the crocodiles have grown unnaturally large and bold. They are left in the Mabira forest, a silent warning to travelers. A person is there one moment, and then they are only a rumor, a ghost haunting the conversations of those who were wise enough to look away, to hear nothing, to say nothing. This is life in a nation held hostage by the grinning, volatile paranoia of one man. That man, Idi Amin Dada, arrives not as a monster, but as a savior. On January 25, 1971, while President Milton Obote is in Singapore, Amin's tanks roll into the capital. The coup is swift, decisive. For many Ugandans, it is a moment of celebration. They dance in the streets, cheering the charismatic 6'4" former Army sergeant and heavyweight boxing champion. He is one of them, a man of little education but immense presence, a soldier who promises to end corruption and tribal favoritism. The British Foreign Office, in its initial assessment, deems him a reliable figure. But the mask of the liberator is thin. Within weeks, the promises curdle. He declares himself president for life. Titles begin to accumulate, each more grandiose than the last, a verbal armor against a deep-seated insecurity. His Excellency, President for Life, Field Marshal Al-Haji, Dr. Idi Amin Dada, VC, DSO, MC, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the seas. The laughter this provokes in foreign capitals does not reach Uganda. Here the purges have already begun. The promise of stability becomes a guarantee of terror. The instruments of this terror are given simple bureaucratic names: the State Research Bureau and the Public Safety Unit. Their headquarters in places like Nakasero Lodge in Kampala become the epicenters of the regime's sadism. Unmarked sedans prowl the streets, their occupants in dark sunglasses, pulling people from their homes, their cars, their lives. Inside the chambers, the air is cold and smells of bleach and fear. The methods are methodical: sledgehammers to shatter limbs, water and electricity, prolonged stress positions until muscles fail and tear. The goal is not intelligence. It is annihilation. Amin understands the theater of cruelty. He orders public executions by firing squad, held in city squares and broadcast on national television. Families are forced to attend, to watch as their loved ones are bound to posts and riddled with bullets. The bodies of high-ranking officials who displease him are left in the trunks of cars or displayed at hotel lobbies. A visceral message to any who might consider dissent. He systematically targets entire ethnic groups, first the Acholi and Langi, tribes loyal to the former president, who are machine-gunned in their barracks by the thousands. Then, the circle of paranoia widens to consume anyone with influence: judges, academics, journalists, clergy, businessmen. By August of 1972, the paranoia has fixated on a new target. Amin declares that God appeared to him in a dream, commanding him to expel Uganda's entire Asian population. These families, many of whom had been in the country for generations, form the backbone of the nation's economy. They are given 90 days to liquidate their assets and leave with nothing but a single suitcase. The economic war, as Amin calls it, is a catastrophic success. 80,000 people are exiled, their homes and businesses handed over to Amin's loyal soldiers and cronies, who promptly run them into the ground. The economy does not just decline, it evaporates. Store shelves are bare. The Ugandan shilling is worthless. Coffee plantations rot in the fields. As the country starves, the killing accelerates. The death toll climbs into the hundreds of thousands. An estimated 300,000, perhaps as many as 500,000, are murdered over 8 years. No one is untouchable. When the Anglican Archbishop, Janani Luwum, publicly condemns the killings, he is arrested. The state radio reports his death in a car accident. His body, when it is seen by his family, is riddled with bullet holes. Amin's end comes not from within, but from without. An ill-conceived invasion of neighboring Tanzania in 1978 prompts a full-scale counter-assault. As the combined force of the Tanzanian army and Ugandan exiles marches on Kampala in April 1979, the self-proclaimed conqueror of the British Empire flees. He escapes first to Libya, then Iraq, and finally to a comfortable state-funded exile in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. He will never face a tribunal. He dies of kidney failure in his bed in 2003. But in Uganda, the horror of his reign is just beginning to be unearthed. The torture cells are opened, their walls layered with dried blood and desperate messages scratched into the concrete. Mass graves are discovered in the forests, silent testaments to the scale of the slaughter. The nation is economically shattered, its institutions hollowed out, its social fabric torn along the tribal lines Amin so expertly exploited. The silence that falls over the country is not one of peace, but of exhaustion. It is the quiet of a landscape haunted by the ghosts of a generation, a silence that still echoes in the waters of the Nile. The weight of these histories is a chilling testament to absolute power. It leaves one final, unsettling question. What is more terrifying? The tyrant who believes they are a god, or the one who knows, with perfect clarity, that they are a monster?